Just a decade ago, if I were to ask you who might be the next generation of economic superpowers, you might think of many nations, but Vietnam wouldn't have made that list. But today, Vietnam is slowly on its way to becoming one of the biggest economies in Southeast Asia. Ranking only behind Singapore in the ASEAN region, this country could give even bigger economies like Indonesia a run for their money with its ever-expanding export industry. Vietnam went through multiple reforms and political changes, and thanks to its ever-growing economy, it became the perfect hub for foreign direct investment. But how did this war-torn country achieve so much? Stay tuned till the very end to find out. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos like this. Without further ado, here's how Vietnam became a rising star. Well, to understand that, we must first understand how and where Vietnam started. Like every other country in the region, modern-day Vietnam also has colonial roots. The French colonized Vietnam from the late 19th century until the Viet Minh won the Battle of Dien Bien Phu and declared independence in 1954. However, the colonial forces left an everlasting mark on the country. Thanks to the French, the Western legal system, education, and of course Christianity made their way into the daily lives of Vietnamese people. Even today, the Vietnamese language has many borrowed words from the French language. In fact, a French Jesuit missionary developed the current Vietnamese script, changing it from the Chinese characters previously used. Not to mention, directly or indirectly, that French colonization sparked the Vietnam War by dividing the country between the Communist North and the Free Market South. And it's no secret how devastating the war was for the people of Vietnam and the country as a whole. It was long, brutal, and left the country in one of the worst economic conditions known to mankind. The Vietnamese economy was in shambles in the mid-1980s, with a GDP growth rate of only 3.8% in 1985 and an average inflation rate of 263% in the subsequent 4 years. The nation was among the poorest in Asia. And because of its centrally planned economy, ghosts of the war, and exceptionally low productivity, the country became highly reliant on imports. But soon enough, the Vietnamese Communist Party realized that full-blown communism wasn't the way to go. So, in 1986, they launched a program of sweeping economic and institutional renovation called the Doi Moi, also called Restoration Reforms. However, it wasn't until the year 1988 that the program was actually implemented. These changes were a radical break from the past, shifting the economy away from central planning and toward a market-based approach to resource allocation. The government supported private enterprise, acknowledged individual land rights, and outlawed collective farming. These developments, Vietnam's military withdrawal from Cambodia in 1989, and intensified efforts to improve relations with its neighbors, set the nation's path towards one of the most remarkable periods of economic prosperity in world history. In doing so, the country managed to bring its poverty rate down from 75% in the 1980s to under 5% in 2021. Not to mention, Vietnam was able to pull more than 10 million people out of poverty in the 2010s alone. Economic growth in Vietnam has been steady as a result of this liberalization drive. It averaged approximately 7% from 2000 to 2022 and kept up the pace of around 4% even during the difficult pandemic period. And that isn't the most impressive part of the country's development. Looking back nearly a decade, in 2010, Vietnam had the lowest GDP per capita among the 5 big Southeast Asian countries, coming in at a mere $2,028. But by 2021, Vietnam had passed the Philippines and was drawing near to Indonesia. But Vietnam's story isn't just in numbers. It is in the efforts the country has shown to reach those numbers. In the fourth quarter of 2023, Vietnam's GDP growth was mostly driven by the industry and service sectors, with growth rates of 7.35% and 7.29% respectively, with the agricultural sector experiencing a growth rate of 4.13%. These numbers show that Vietnam's attempts to increase productivity and diversify its economy have been successful. The Vietnamese economy is heavily reliant on exports, with its export-to-GDP ratio reaching 94% in 2022. With the exception of Singapore, 186.6%, no Southeast Asian country has this as high. Last year, Vietnam's goods exports jumped by 10.6%. However, with the US and EU economies slowing down, which make up 42% of Vietnam's exports, we've seen a dip in 2023. Despite these challenges, Vietnam is set for a strong recovery and growth soon, expecting exports to rebound. That's promising for the economy. With a total of $371.8 billion in exports, Vietnam is easily one of the biggest developing nations in this regard. But what really helped Vietnam's export-centric strategy in recent years is the fact that the country is exporting products similar in structure to Chinese exports and a great substitute for Chinese manufacturing. Using the Export Similarity Index is a fantastic approach to examine Vietnam's advantages as a China replacement. On a scale of 0 to 1, this indicator shows the degree to which exports from two nations are similar. When looking at Asian countries compared to China on this measure, Vietnam scores top because of the higher level of export similarities. The export similarity rose from 0.075 in 2004 to 0.796 in 2021, as suggested by the correlation coefficient, indicating that the export structure of Vietnam is swiftly approaching that of China over time. To understand why that is, we can compare the top 10 exports of the two nations, and they share 7 out of 10 exports. The manufacturing export appears to be the main factor contributing to this rising similarity. Both are heavily involved in the electronics, computer, apparel, and furniture industries. Consequently, it should come as no surprise that, despite the worldwide recession, both nations have had record-breaking export years. As previously stated, Vietnam's reform process began in the mid-80s and was gradual. The trend towards remote work has prompted a search for new electronics, computers, and furniture. However, this parallel in export growth alone does not provide a complete explanation. The Vietnamese have actively sought trade liberalization, a prominent topic when reviewing the laws passed throughout the years. In 1987, Vietnam passed the Foreign Investment Law, which is considered one of the earliest pro-trade agreements in the country's history. Thanks to its advantageous trade agreements, low labor cost, strategic position, and generally stable macroeconomic climate, Vietnam's export-oriented economy has flourished and created a competitive business environment. As a result, many foreign investors have shown interest in investing in Vietnam's electronics and semiconductor industries. Vietnam is expected to absorb about $36 to $38 billion in foreign direct investment in 2023, but it wasn't a coincidence. An important component of Vietnam's export-oriented economy is the manufacturing and processing sector, which remained top for foreign investments, pulling in $16.8 billion or 60.6% of the total. But that's not the only sector that's seen FDI inflows. About 16% of the FDI went into Vietnam's real estate market in 2022. The rising demand for residential, commercial, and hotel space has been a major factor in Vietnam's real estate market's meteoric rise in recent years. The country has made countless efforts to attract FDI, and as a result, it was able to diversify its export markets and products to improve its technology, skills, and productivity with the support of foreign direct investment. This opened the door for foreign-owned businesses to join the formerly closed domestic market. The strategic location, stable government-friendly economic climate, and vast labor force of Vietnam make it one of the most appealing Southeast Asian destinations for foreign direct investment. Although investments shrank worldwide during the COVID-19 outbreak, Vietnam was able to keep its FDI levels relatively high in comparison to other nations in the area. The expansion of online shopping, the digitization of payment methods, and the increasing number of people with internet access are all factors influencing the growth of this industry in Vietnam. In terms of gross domestic product, export-oriented manufacturing, and foreign direct investments, Vietnam stands out even in ASEAN countries. All of this came together to give Vietnam what's known as an economic miracle. In just 13 years, Vietnam's GDP has almost tripled, going from $147.2 billion in 2010 to about $430 billion in 2023. From an impressive growth in 2022 at 8.02%, the economy slipped to 5.05% growth in 2023, even though the IMF predicted 5.7% growth. This made the Philippines the fastest-growing ASEAN economy of 2023. However, the outlook looks quite good for the future, and the IMF forecasts over 6.5% growth in coming years for Vietnam. The question of whether Vietnam would ever catch up to its neighboring countries in terms of wealth or even experience faster economic growth would likely elicit laughter from those in the early 2000s, but now the emerging talent has blown everyone away. And that's just looking at the past. When we think about the future, we see a lot of hope directed towards Vietnam, since many analysts and institutions have predicted that it will become an economic superpower and retain the fastest-growing economy title in the ASEAN. But it's not like the country doesn't have any challenges. Vietnam has recently achieved a lot of success by marketing itself as a base for manufacturing and its cheap labor. Thanks to this, the country has been able to enter the middle-income bracket, but Vietnam is just starting out its journey. Rising levels of automation pose a challenge to this employment boom by undercutting Vietnam's competitive edge in low-cost labor. To make matters worse, a bulk of Vietnamese, about 40%, still work in agriculture, with just 25% having official contracts. This means that even when it comes to FDI, there's a clear split between the official and informal sectors of economies, and this promotes economic dualism. Not only that, after gaining 8% growth in 2022, Vietnam was hoping for at least 7% GDP growth in 2023, but fell short of even 6%. This has caused worries among the Vietnamese government about the uncertain future of the country. One good thing about Vietnam is its young workforce. About 69% of the country's population falls under the working age. But there's a catch. For a country that only has about 100 million people, Vietnam sends the most number of its youth abroad for studies, basically brain-draining the country. There are more Vietnamese students in foreign universities than in Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia combined. Nevertheless, one can't deny that Vietnamese economic growth over the past few decades has been nothing short of a miracle. But what do you think? Will Vietnam continue on the path of leading the ASEAN pack, or has its fall begun? Let us know in the comments below.